This video goes into the internal details of the sample data collection app built with Alpha Anywhere for the concrete mixing daily, truck daily inspection, and it goes into how the custom CSS was done. Now, this video assumes that you've already seen the Alpha Anywhere custom CSS in a UX component video that shows you a variety of techniques and reasons why you set the CSS to be able to get the effect that you want. Those specific examples in that video were designed for here, and it was recorded as part of this set of tutorials. So let's start. If you look here at the app, let's see it actually running. So we'll switch over here, and here we see the app running, and you can click on or tap on something and you can see a spec, and this has this in it, and there's things like this, and you can go to sync and it looks like that. So you've seen these, and that's the look that we wanted to get. So let's see where that came from. Well, what happened originally is that the functionality, we sort of decided on the functionality, but exactly what the flow was going to be, what screens we were going to have, and how to go from one screen to another, and exactly what those screens would look like hadn't been decided. And we worked with a user interface and graphic designer who came up with a design. And that design, that initial design, was done using Adobe Illustrator, I think, and produced images that look like this. These are some sample images that you can see that show how the designer was thinking the pages should look, the different screens, and we went over this to make sure that it had the functionality and the flow that looked natural. So there was a lot of back and forth while we worked with these screens. And once we had some idea of this based on her idea of, we should have a way of traversing through errors, and there should be different types, and here's how we should put some of this. And this evolved over time. Then what she did is she actually produced an HTML version of this. This has a scroll because we're showing this on a desktop browser, not on a mobile device. But a mobile device, this wouldn't be here. And you can see that the pages look like this, and I can go, if I push sync, it looks like this, and I can go back here, and if I click on errors, it looks. So you get the idea that this is and this was actually working. This is actual HTML. I mean, these are. And this had a real CSS file and an HTML, a set of HTML files. These were all separate pages. Each time I clicked on this, I can go back, and you can go through this, as you can see what I went through. But I could examine the files, and I had all sorts of CSS and HTML that showed me something that got the look that she was looking for. And so now it was my challenge to be able to recreate that in Alpha Anywhere. So I put together first the cards, the layout and the cards and the navigators and some buttons to get the flow working the right way. I didn't worry about how it looked. I just worried that we had the right panel cards and the right navigators, and that I could go from one to the other as I wanted using buttons. And once that was together, started putting in some of the lists and stuff to get it starting to work. But then came actually styling it. And as you can see here, there's a sub-theme that I'm using on all of the cards. The cards use forms base. I name all of my sub-themes with forms something or other lowercase. And you can see that. You can also see that buttons have a container class and container prevent float, and a sub-theme of header, and this is container class name forms header right to change the positioning of where things were. So if you've seen that other video, this looks very familiar. This is how you're able to define where things are. And all you need to do is to get all those classes correct. And those classes, in essence, were copied in many cases, often with no modification or very little modification, from the sample, the static HTML multi-page version of the look of the pages, and it was used right here. So if we look at, so like this is the container class name is form setting item name. If we look here, you'll see that in addition to the standard items that you see in the normal Alpha Anywhere theme, there are a whole lot of these other choice this and messaging that and editor, and all of these at the beginning are ones that came from the custom CSS. And if you look here, you'll see there's header button and account button, and there's forms header right. These are a lot of the positioning inline block, and it uses the SAS style definitions for colors that we're able to use in Alpha Anywhere, where you can define colors. You can define dollar names and then say that we'll use that like a macro to be able to use these named values. Here's input. This is how we want the input control to look. This is the form's password, and so a lot of the stuff, as you go through this looking at how it was done, I'm not going to actually go through each of them, but basically you can look here and you'll see all sorts of, here's messaging overlay, and here's where you'll find a lot of the definitions, okay? And we'll look at a few of them later on specifically. And you can find this also if you go to Properties, Local CSS Definitions. It's right there. And you can actually get to many of them just by using this, click in here and then click one of these, and you should be able to go to a given place. So if I want to go to Editor Next, I can go to Editor Next. Well, that was easy. If I want to be able to, some of them, like this one here, editor top container, are not alphabetic. It's sort of this order thing right now, at least as I'm using it, sorts them towards the bottom. And you might need that to be able to find where you want to go. But this is helpful to finding those, okay? So that's how you can find a lot of the things that are here. But some of the others are in the themes. So this is a local sub-theme definitions. And first the sub-themes are for panel cards, panel navigator, panel layout. These I think may or may not have been used, but I know that this one, obviously, form space for panel card was used. Some of the CSS classes you find were there for a while, and then I ended up using something else as the design changed and the way that I implemented it changed. So there is a little bit of archaeological cruft in there that you sort of have to you'll ignore. So just because you find something defined doesn't mean it's used anywhere. But a lot of things are. List box. So for a list box, you have to have all of this stuff. The forms list box, you have to define all these things for a list box. And they're all defined for forms list, as you can see here. Forms list this and forms list that. And then there are for button. And there are many different types of buttons. The box buttons, the medium 14, the medium 14 normal. This is because you'll see that a lot of them are different in the design. They came out for various reasons that are somewhat similar, but enough different that it was worth creating its own up here to make it easy to set it. So that's, and you'll see how they're used. The CSS for those, forms panel header, this is where you have this. the forms panel body, and this should look familiar from anybody who's seen the other video. The forms list here. Now, if we look at the style.js, this is the one for the whole theme that comes from alpha. And if you look in here and look at list, if we go to the list box has, for the base, has all of these: the view, the group, the header, the footer. So this, I just copied this and put that into here to be able to get everything that we needed over here for the list box. And then I made sure that I got these correct. Of course, I could copy from the style.css. I could copy the right one here. So if I look for, there's buttons and there's the lists, the list footer, all the different list ones are here. I could copy, if I wanted to, the default ones, but you can see here that all these different parts of the list are set up the way that the designer said to make them. That there are these different, what to do for hover and for inactive, and should we do this, and and how to handle the different list item stuff. Now, some of the classes that you'll see named inside of the definitions refer to here and don't refer to the full CSS, the local CSS. They refer to the ones that are here inside, that come along with the local themes. And you'll see those because they have forms list, lowercase, forms button. There are a lot of forms button things that you'll see here. And you'll find these in here. So that'll help you be able to find, like the stopwatch ones, as you may have seen in another video, they come from here. Okay. So now you can see how those were set, so that if you find a button and the button is a subtheme header plane, now you know where that subtheme, you can now look that up in there and see how it was defined. So if we go here and look at the JavaScript and look at button, we see there's button header plane. And it says that the class name is forms button, and forms header plane button is also one of the classes put on it. And just use this. And then if you go here and you look for forms button, header plane, and you see what the definition is here. So that gives you some idea of how to be able to look through this. Let's look at the main list. It has properties. In the properties is the no records HTML, and this uses some classes here. This was defined. This is the color that for the background that they want, for the inline style for it. And if you look here, the list item selected class name, here it is. Forms list item selected unmarked, because the not showing the selected one was the decision by the designer that this was not going to have that. So you can sort of see how these are done. And in the list layout, just using it plain. If we look at the form view gets interesting. First of all, in the form properties, remember conflict resolution. The method for resolving conflicts are that if you try to edit a conflict, it doesn't use the normal editor. It instead goes to this editor set, this editor, the conflict editor, and that's how the editor, it chooses to go to that. I may not have mentioned that enough before, but that's how that decision, instead of just using what editor is set with the particular field that says what it is, this will take precedent for if there's a conflict, a right conflict. The item class name is forms row item. If it's selected, it's forms row selected. Throw on error. This is added if a field has an error, and this is added if a field has a conflict. And error text, that's not actually shown. And if we look at then let's look at the different layouts. If we look at ID values, here's the default template. The default template says just use the field label here, and the class is forms row value field. Now, the CSS classes here are most of them come from here, from the CSS design specifically for this control. So if you copy this form and put it somewhere else, you'll get the same ones. And here's groups and group names and group name first and instructions and each of the different rows and the group rows and group row item and etc. And this is an organizing principle that came pretty much out of the design. If we look at this design, there are all these different parts here, and they all have different CSS for those parts, and this comes out of that. You'll notice here it says that if you have an error, and it's an error, and inside of it has a gets error background, then give it this red, and the same thing with conflict. And it says here that if it's a forms row item error short, then do a display none. So this is used for the forms row where you'll see this in a second. But if there is if it's an error above it, if that item is set as having an error, then display block and don't do display none. The same thing for conflict short. So let's look at that here. If we go to vehicle specs, we see that the default template says that there's this the word validation error and the word right conflict, and those are up here, and they get forms row item error short, which if the whole thing gets an error, remember we have this error and conflict. If the whole thing gets an error, then those are shown. If not, those are not shown. And otherwise, they have forms row value, and forms row item gets error background, which if this is error or conflict, then this turns it the right color. So notice these are above in this design because if we go back to, let's go back to the real app. If you look here, you would want to put over the error indicator goes over here, while if you're here, the error indicator, they're different. The way in which the errors are displayed are different. Let's do that. We can do a sync all and a value error. And let's take a look at that. Validation error is here. And if I go here, validation error is not down with the value. It's up here with the name and not here with the down with the value. The other one actually shows it down with the value. That's so what happened over here is this gets the classes based on the field name. It picks up this is how it's able to figure out what color it is, and validation error, right conflict shows up if it's an error or not, and there's the field label. So this is where that comes from. The form layout. If you look at the form layout, the containers, how this is forms group. Within the group is a group name, and then this is just static text within it. Perhaps you could have put that right on here, but I used the containers to make it more obvious what's going on. This is instructions, and here are the instructions, and this is the group rows, and this is the group row out of the section row section name, and the group instructions. And then here are the actual items within it, and then here's another section name, and it goes within. So you get the idea that this is set up in a way similar to the way that the divs were put within each other to be able to create the look that you saw in the original HTML, and it gives some organizing principle here. And when you add an item, you can add containers, and containers basically are like divs, depending on how you, unless you use some of the special ones, or actually are divs, is the way that they're rendered. And you can take a look at that by using the freeform editor to look at the text that, so let's take a simpler one here. If we go to my deval a little shorter, you can see how this in the freeform editor gets put together with the templates get put in, and with high-level placeholders. You can see the low-level placeholders expand this even more by expanding some of these the special values here. And but this looks very much like the original HTML and CSS that came from the designer, and that's one of the ideas behind the view boxes and the form views, is to allow you to be able to use CSS and HTML just the same way that you would if you were hand creating in HTML, in straight HTML and CSS, a design without having special controls that have their own behaviors that may not be the same way. This way you can get down into the details if you want, but still use that over and over again. And we'll go back to the Genie mode here, and still to be able to use a nice simple way like this to be able to build it. So you're basically not doing any coding at all as you're building this. This was built with barely any code at all. So that shows you that. Let me show you a few other things. If we look at the progress overlay, there's a spinner, and as it points out, the spinner has 8 lines that use CSS transforms that position lines at different angles. I'll show you that in a second. Just little lines. And the animation, there's CSS animation to change opacity from black to transparent and back again, and making the time difference. And that makes it look like it's rotating. And if you look at this, here we go. If we look here, you'll see that there is, this is a class form weight spinner line. This is rotated every 45 degrees. There's 8 lines, one every 45 degrees. And then because it's rotated, you still have to position it a little differently, translate it to get it in just the right place so it spins just right. And this animation starts immediately. This animation starts 0.15 seconds later, 0.3 seconds later, so that they each start going darker, light, to dark to light, dark, or dark back to light, light, dark. And it's like that. And if you then look at it, if we go here, and for example, let's log out and do a double, see that? That is done through that animation, and that's using that. And if you look at the HTML, you'll see that the CSS definitions have that in it. Another thing to look at is the editors. At the top of the editors, there's a top container, and the top container is where, if we look here, look at the local CSS and its editor top container. So let's go to editor top container, and that sets that background to a light gray. Okay, and then we have the top field container. The field container if you look at it, it uses table cell with vertical align middle, and it has a specific height and a big width, knowing it'll be cut off to fit within the max of the container that it's in, the screen there. And what this does is it takes, and then there's a field name which has a line height of 18, font size of 16. Some of these things, if they have more than one line, they'll wrap, but they won't wrap too big because it's a small line height. And there's a field name, and there's an input line, and this is the value line. You know that only one of these is shown, but we don't know, or maybe sometimes none of them are shown, and something else. And this will center within this space in the height that it's supposed to be, the contents in there. And if you remember, the next and previous buttons are absolutely positioned on top of it, so that if we go down here, so this part here, here's where you have it being within this section here is being centered, and this is here, so that if we go to something, notice this is one line, this is now two lines, but it's still centered very nicely here. That's the effect that we were able to get. And notice these, some of these do move a bit, but the whole height of this stays the same. And hopefully that does enough of what the designer wanted. And so you get, I guess you can get the idea here of how you can now go through this and look at the different containers and see how it was done. And if you want to get the same effect, you can get the same effect just by looking at the definitions that are used here. Sometimes some of the container widths, some of the widths of things are specific, knowing that there's going to be the size of the text that might be in the field, so that some things are bigger or smaller, so that they'll fit and they won't overlap too much or bump into each other, and they get truncated appropriately. So that was all crafting specific, specifically for some of the common cases, or sometimes the worst case for a small device. This a lot of this works on a variety of different phone sizes. So hopefully I've shown you, I think I've shown you most of pretty much the way the CSS works here. And I hope this is helpful and help you figure out if you want to take your own CSS and HTML and be able to apply it to your component. You'll be able to get some ideas from here and techniques that might work. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. It is a way that I did this particular one, and it's one that worked and can be helpful to getting somebody who is much more comfortable with HTML and CSS into being able to get exactly what they want out of Alpha Anywhere. Thank you very much.